The Montana wilderness stretched endless beneath a pewter sky in late spring 1879, where bitter winds swept across the Judith Basin, hurling dust against the weathered panes of a modest homestead. Samuel Thorne, 31 years weathered by frontier hardship, pressed his weathered palm against the cold glass, watching the empty horizon. The postal carriage was overdue. Once more. His eyes strained toward the winding trail that snaked eastward to Fort Benton, his pulse quickening despite his efforts to remain calm. Outside, his young sons Lucas and Owen raced through the livestock pen, their joyous shouts piercing the howling wind. They remained oblivious to what approached. Within the dwelling, Samuel's calloused thumb traced the worn edges of correspondence tucked deep in his vest pocket. His crude penmanship had journeyed across the continent to Ohio, somehow persuading this unknown woman, this complete stranger, to become his bride. Without ever laying eyes on him. The decision had torn at him. For weeks, he'd studied the matrimonial notice in the weekly paper, convinced it was intended for different men, desperate, forsaken men. Then winter claimed his beloved wife. Lung fever stole her breath in merely 7 days. He lowered her into the frozen earth while his children wept until exhaustion claimed them beside her resting place. Following her departure, silence had settled over their property like a shroud. The children couldn't comprehend why their mother wouldn't return home, and Samuel, he labored until his hands cracked and bled, attempting to maintain some semblance of normalcy for his boys. Yet he couldn't fulfill both parental roles indefinitely. Therefore, he'd penned a desperate plea for someone compassionate, someone with patience, someone capable of nurturing 2 untamed children with gentle guidance and unwavering devotion. Miraculously, she'd agreed. The passenger wagon emerged from the dust cloud, leaving a trail of grit in its wake. Samuel stepped onto the wooden porch, his heartbeat thundering now. He dried his sweating palms against his work pants and straightened his posture as the vehicle groaned to a halt. The coachman dismounted and unlatched the passenger door. She emerged. Her stature was petite, not fragile precisely, but delicate in a manner that made her appear younger than her actual years. Chestnut hair was secured in a tidy arrangement, her traveling dress simple and creased from the long journey. She gripped her single traveling case with such intensity that her knuckles had turned bone white. When she raised her gaze to meet his, her amber eyes, soft yet wide with apprehension, locked with his own. No smile crossed her lips. She remained motionless at the coach steps, as though uncertain her trembling legs could support her weight. Samuel acted first. He crossed the dusty yard quickly, his boots grinding against the dry earth, and halted before her. "You would be Miss Clara," he said, his voice deliberately measured and gentle. She responded with a single nod. "Indeed. Clara Whitmore." He extended his hand in greeting. "Samuel Thorne. I'm grateful you made the journey." A lengthy pause preceded her tentative reach, her fingers quivering as they made contact with his. Her gaze swept across the vast landscape, the humble dwelling, the boys now observing from behind the barn structure. "I've never ventured beyond the eastern states," she whispered. "I suspected as much," he replied softly. "Yet you came regardless." Her eyes dropped downward. No family remained in Ohio. Samuel's throat tightened. He hadn't known the details of her circumstances, only that her written response had conveyed honesty and kindness. "Those are my boys," he said, gesturing toward the corral. "Lucas there has reached 6 years. Owen has seen 4 summers. They're boisterous, somewhat unruly, but they possess good hearts." Clara observed them carefully. The children stared back with curiosity tempered by caution. "They've lost their mother," Samuel continued, his voice dropping. Several months passed. Clara acknowledged this with a nod. She posed no questions, merely watched the children with an expression impossible to decipher. He cleared his throat. "You have a place here. We can proceed gradually if that suits you." She met his eyes again, and something shifted in her expression. Not terror, but something approaching it. As if she held herself rigidly to prevent complete collapse. "I shall give my utmost effort," she declared. Samuel nodded once. "That's all I require." He reached for her luggage. She hesitated momentarily, then released her grip. He carried it toward the house while she followed. The boys trailed behind, speaking in hushed tones. Inside, the dwelling was tidy but eerily quiet. The kitchen retained the faint aroma of morning stew. Clara paused in the threshold, her eyes taking inventory of the space: rough-hewn floorboards, stone fireplace, a threadbare settee, and the small dining table where the children took their meals. "I've prepared a chamber for you," Samuel explained, indicating the hallway. "It's entirely yours. Take time to settle. We needn't discuss matrimony today or in the coming days." She faced him directly. "But your advertisement sought a wife." "I sought assistance," he corrected. "Marriage can develop in time. If you desire it." Her gaze remained fixed on his. "And should I not desire it? Then you'll maintain shelter and the boys will have someone who cares for them." She studied him for an extended moment. Then her voice emerged quietly. Most men wouldn't make such a statement. Samuel raked his fingers through his hair. "I'm not like most men." Clara's rigid posture relaxed slightly. She then turned and proceeded down the corridor. That evening, she assisted in preparing the boys for sleep. She read them a tale in steady, controlled tones, despite her trembling hands gripping the volume. Samuel observed from the doorway, noting how the children leaned against her naturally. When she closed the book and prepared to leave, Lucas whispered, "You carry the scent of blossoms." Clara froze. Samuel intervened. "Time for rest now." But she glanced back at the child. A small smile appeared. "Thank you kindly." She passed Samuel in the corridor, her expression unreadable once more. He remained silent, simply walking alongside her to the kitchen. She paused there, her hand resting on the counter, eyes focused on the dying flames. "Fear consumes me," she admitted, barely audible. Samuel nodded understanding. "I'm aware. I've never raised children. I'll guide you." She turned to face him. "What motivates this kindness toward me?" He looked directly into her eyes. "Because I understand the pain of losing everything." They stood in silence. Then, slowly, she seated herself at the table. He poured coffee that remained warming on the stove. Few words passed between them that night, but she consumed the coffee, and when she retired, she didn't secure the door. Outside, the wind rose again across the hills, but within the house, for the first time in months, the space felt occupied. Not complete, not yet, but no longer vacant. Dawn arrived slowly the following morning, pale golden light filtering through the delicate curtains in Clara's modest room. Sleep had eluded her. The mattress felt firm, the wind had whispered through gaps in the walls, and the house's stillness felt overwhelming. Nevertheless, she rose before the children stirred, washed using the ceramic basin, and secured her hair in a tight braid. The kitchen stood empty when she entered, though the hearth retained residual warmth. A worn apron hung from a peg beside the cooking stove. She slipped it over her head and began gathering available ingredients: cornmeal, cooking fat, several eggs in a wooden bowl on the shelf. The flour container was nearly depleted. She noted this silently. She was ladling batter into the skillet when Samuel entered from outside, his collar moistened with morning dew and a piece of straw clinging to his sleeve. He stopped in the doorway, their eyes meeting briefly to exchange an unspoken understanding. "You've risen early," he observed, placing a milk pail on the counter. "As have you." He shook his head slightly. "The livestock won't wait." She returned attention to the pan. "I hope you don't object. I didn't request permission for cooking." "No permission needed. The aroma is pleasant." The boys appeared minutes later, barefoot and still disheveled from sleep. Owen rubbed one eye while Lucas climbed onto the bench without instruction. "Good morning, Miss Clara," Lucas said, observing her with obvious curiosity. She placed a plate before him. "Simply Clara will suffice." Samuel leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, watching her movement around the kitchen. She spoke little, but her actions were confident. When Owen knocked over his milk, she didn't react harshly, merely cleaned the spill and refilled his cup. Following breakfast, Samuel took the boys outside to care for the poultry and inspect the boundary fencing. Clara remained behind, washing dishes with heated water from the stove. She located a broom and swept the floors, then opened windows to allow fresh air circulation. The house carried scents of dust and wood smoke, But beneath these she detected the subtle fragrance of lilac from a bush near the rear entrance. By midday she had unpacked her meager possessions: a Bible, a small looking-glass, and a faded photograph of a woman who resembled her but appeared older. She placed it on the bedside table and sat on the bed's edge, hands folded in her lap. A knock on the doorframe startled her. "Would you mind assisting me with something?" Samuel inquired. He stood holding a coil of rope in one hand and work gloves in the other. She followed him to the barn where a pile of firewood required sorting. He demonstrated the size needed for the stove, then began splitting larger logs with clean, practiced strokes. She stacked while he worked. "I've never lived beneath such expansive skies," she remarked after a time. "You become accustomed to it. It makes one feel insignificant." His axe paused mid-swing. "Sometimes that's beneficial." She didn't respond, continuing to stack. The rhythm brought her comfort. "In Dayton, I worked at a textile shop," she said after extended silence. "The windows overlooked the street. I observed people passing all day. Never imagined I'd miss that." "Do you miss it now?" "Not the commotion. Simply knowing my place." Samuel set down the axe and leaned on the handle. "You needn't know your place immediately. You've just arrived." She examined the pile they'd created together. "I suppose that's accurate." That evening, after supper, the boys sat on the floor playing with carved animals while Samuel mended a leather harness at the table. Clara repaired one of Lucas's shirts, her needle moving in small, precise stitches. "Are you skilled with letters?" Samuel asked without looking up. "I can read and write," she replied. "Why do you ask?" "The boys will need education come autumn. I can't teach them much beyond livestock counting and brand recognition." She nodded. "I can assist with that." He gave a quiet sound of approval. Later, when the boys slept and the house had grown quiet again, Clara stood by her window, watching stars appear above the hills. She didn't feel settled. Not yet. But there had been no harsh words, no tense silences, only steady hands and shared labor. When she turned from the window, she discovered a small package on her bed. Wrapped in brown fabric was a bar of lavender soap. No note accompanied it, but she knew its source. Spring transitioned to early summer gradually, with green spreading across the fields and the sound of frogs rising at twilight near the creek. The earth softened, and with it something subtle began to change between Clara and Samuel, unspoken but present. Like warmth that remains after a fire has died. Clara had begun walking the fence line during afternoons, carrying a wire basket for gathering wild herbs and berries. She discovered a patch of chokecherry near the western pasture and brought back sufficient quantity to boil into syrup. Samuel didn't inquire about her plans. He simply sharpened her small knife and left a kettle on the stove. One evening, while the boys remained outside attempting to capture grasshoppers in glass jars, Samuel entered, brushing dust from his sleeves. "Margaret wishes to meet you," he said, setting a package on the table. Clara looked up from the basin where she was rinsing jars. "Who is Margaret?" "A neighbor. Resides near Flat Willow Creek." She was acquainted with. He paused, then said, "My wife." Clara dried her hands slowly. "I don't wish to intrude where I'm unwelcome." "You won't," he said. "Margaret is kind. Somewhat inquisitive, but not malicious." Clara nodded once. "Did you inform her of my circumstances?" Samuel sat across from her. "Told her what was necessary. She doesn't pass judgment." The following morning, they hitched the wagon and traveled along the ridge trail. The boys rode in the back, sharing a tin whistle between them. Clara sat beside Samuel, one hand in her lap, the other steadying her bonnet against the wind. Margaret's homestead sat low near the Cartonwoods, with a smokehouse behind and a garden full of onions gone to seed. She emerged wiping her hands on her apron. A robust woman with grey-streaked hair and a voice roughened by pipe tobacco. "You must be Clara," she said, bypassing pleasantries. "Come inside and sit. I've baked pie." Inside, the cottage was cluttered but welcoming: lace curtains, a painted plate above the hearth. Cinnamon scented the air. Margaret poured coffee without asking and handed Clara a slice of apple pie. "So," Margaret said, settling across from her. Do you long for the East? Clara glanced at Samuel, who stood by the door, arms crossed. I miss the sound of church bells, Clara said quietly. Margaret chuckled. You'll adapt to cricket songs instead. The women conversed while the boys chased Margaret's cat underfoot and Samuel stepped outside to check the horses. Margaret inquired about sewing, preserving, remedies, and whether Clara had ever assisted with animal births. A goat kid, Margaret clarified with a grin. I haven't, Clara replied. You will, Margaret responded. There's no life here that doesn't eventually involve something you never expected to do. Clara looked at her hands. Back east, she had spent days measuring fabric and handling transactions. Here, she was learning to read weather patterns, distinguish fertile soil from poor, understand the language of animals and growing things. The wind strengthened again that night, rattling the shutters. As Clara extinguished the lamp in her room, she found 2 folded papers tucked beneath her pillow. Owen had drawn a stick figure wearing a triangle dress. Lucas's depicted a horse with her name spelled phonetically below. She sat on the bed's edge, the papers trembling in her hands. A gentle knock came moments later. Are you decent? Samuel's voice was low. Yes. He entered, carrying a folded blanket. Found this in the barn loft. Thought your room might get cold. She accepted it, fingers brushing his. I believe they're beginning to trust me, she said. They are. She looked up at him. And you? He didn't answer immediately. His gaze held hers, steady and worn. I trust what I observe, he said. And I see you making an effort. She gave a small nod. That's all I know how to do. He stepped back into the hall. That's sufficient. Clara spread the blanket across her bed. It carried scents of cedar and dried hay. She curled beneath it, the boy's drawings beside her on the nightstand. Somewhere in the stillness, she allowed her shoulders to relax, not completely, but more than before. By mid-June, the days extended long and dry, and the dirt road cutting through the basin baked hard beneath the sun. Clara sought shade when possible, tending the gardens Samuel had abandoned after his wife's passing. The soil proved stubborn, but she coaxed green from it with patient hands, string beans, turnips, several rows of lettuce that wilted less under her care. Samuel sometimes watched her from the barn, not lingering, just pausing in whatever task occupied his attention. He didn't speak unless she initiated conversation. But when she requested a better spade, he brought her two, and when she needed help turning the compost, he set down his post driver and assisted without a word. One morning, after Owen awakened with fever and a cough that made his chest labor, Clara soaked linen in cool water and placed it across his forehead. She remained beside the bed, counting his breaths, dabbing his skin, whispering him softly, while Lucas sat on the floor nearby, unusually quiet, holding his brother's hand. When Samuel appeared in the doorway and saw her there, he didn't appear panicked, just weary in a way that settled deep in his shoulders. Should I fetch the doctor? He asked quietly. Clara didn't lift her gaze from Owen. No. Not yet. I've witnessed worse. Samuel exhaled slowly. You've cared for sick children before? No, she said. But I nursed my sister until her end. I recognize when fever becomes dangerous. He didn't question her judgment. He simply brought fresh water, boiled cloths, and sat outside the room with his head in his hands until she summoned him back. By nightfall, Owen had cooled, still weak, but his breathing had steadied. Clara didn't leave his side until he slept, his fingers curled around the edge of the quilt she'd mended. You didn't need to stay with him so long, Samuel said as she joined him by the fire. He needed someone, she said, folding her hands in her lap. So did I, he answered quietly. She looked over, and for the first time there was nothing guarded in her expression. No worry about saying appropriate things, no doubt about her position. You said marriage could wait, she said. Do you still wish to wait? Samuel turned toward her. I wanted to give you space to find your footing. I've found it, she said. I'm uncertain what comes next, but I want to discover it. He nodded once, then reached across the space between them and took her hand. His palm was rough, warm. He didn't squeeze. He simply held it there, steady. The next morning, they informed the boys. Lucas grinned so widely his ears lifted. Owen, still pale, blinked up from his blanket and asked, "Does that mean she remains forever?" Clara leaned down and kissed his temple. "Yes, sweetheart. I remain forever." They wed a week later beneath the cartonwood behind the house. Margaret brought bread and a jar of lilac water. The boys picked wildflowers and tucked them into Clara's braid. Samuel cleaned up and wore a white shirt that strained across his shoulders. When he spoke his vows, he didn't raise his voice, but every word carried truth. That night, after the boys slept and the fire burned low, Samuel and Clara sat on the porch steps in silence. The moon hung low and the wind was gentle. She leaned into his side, her head resting near his shoulder. "Fear no longer consumes me," she said. He turned, brushing a strand of her hair behind her ear. "Nor me." And neither of them ever released their hold.